Hey guys, welcome to the class. This is Deviance in Society. Each week I'll make a short video kind of going over some of that week's main ideas. They won't be long. I know that most people hate like long online lectures. It's not gonna work. So they'll be pretty short. Most part I have less than 15 minutes usually. Um, so I want to go over, before I talk a little bit about this week's ideas, I want to talk a little bit about the class generally. Let's kind of set the stage for the class. Let me share my screen. So it's not happening as fast as I wanted to, but here we are. Okay. All right. So first off, we need to kind of have a basic definition of deviance. That's one of the things we'll be kind of talking about throughout the class. We'll be coming back to this. We're going to define deviant as differing from a norm, from the accepted normative standards of society, or a person who differs from a norm. So we can, deviant can be seen as an adjective or as a noun, especially a person whose behavior and attitudes differ from accepted social standards. Sometimes we might define deviant as anything that receives a negative reaction from an audience. And so in this class, we're going to try to answer who deviates, how they deviate, why they deviate, when they deviate, just the entire social construction of this concept and who people are that might be lumped in to this category. We're going to learn to think sociologically about deviance. Now, those of you who've taken sociology class, maybe you need to be reminded of this. Sociology is the systematic study of social behavior in human groups. So to think sociologically about deviance is to employ what we call the sociological imagination. This is the ability to see the relationship between individual experiences and larger social forces. We all have individual experiences. It's not a natural, I think, or easy thing for most of us to think about the relationship between our experiences and larger social forces. I think it's a sort of a discipline that we have to build up. For example, you were all raised in households as children that had certain social class dynamics, right? Some of you were raised in households that had a lot of financial struggles. Some of you were raised in households that had no financial struggles whatsoever. And some of you were raised sort of somewhere in the middle. Now, regardless of your experience there, you probably didn't have any thoughts about how broader structural features impact your experience of social class, right? In other words, you might not be thinking like, what's happening in the world that caused my dad to lose his job, or that contributed to my dad losing his job? What's happening in the world that has made it so that my mom can't seem to get ahead in her position? That would be exercising the sociological imagination, looking at your experience and connecting it to broader social forces that have some effect on your experiences, right? That constrain your experiences in some way. And so to think sociologically about deviance is to think about the relationship between those experiences of deviance and the broader social structure. So questions like, not just what is an example of deviance, but like, why and how did we come to believe that that thing was deviant? Who says what is deviant and what is not? Why do people react in the way that they do to certain forms of deviance? So we're looking at it. It's a kind of a broader question of these social forces that have an effect on the way we understand deviance and the way we define deviance. That's really important to this class, to think sociologically about deviance. I want us to remember, though, that the word deviance is not an insult in the way we use it. For the most part, in kind of our normal day-to-day conversations, the word deviance is usually considered an insult. Like if someone said that your belief system was a deviant belief system, you probably wouldn't take it as a compliment. But in this class, the way we use the word deviance, it's not an insult. It's just a description, okay? It's just a description of a person or belief system that is outside the norms of society. And it's important to remember that as our definition, because norms change. You guys know this, right? Norms change over time. The thing that is normal or acceptable today maybe wasn't normal acceptable in the past, or maybe won't be normal acceptable in the future. Or the thing that is normal and acceptable in this place maybe is not normal or acceptable in some other place. And so understanding the kind of the dynamism of norms helps us understand the dynamism of deviance as well. So because what is normal changes, then what is deviant also changes. There are some examples of deviance that we'll talk about in this class that you will find relatable, and some you will not. There are some examples of deviance in this class that you will find you have a kind of a moral objection or reaction to, and some that have that don't even kind of show up on your moral radar at all. So the study of deviance does not inherently involve moral systems, but it sometimes does. The importance of objectivity and analysis. Now, any kind of social science researcher will tell you that objectivity is important to pursue. It is my belief, and some disagree with me, but it is my belief that researchers cannot be 100% objective. You know, we bring our experiences into it. We bring our preferences, our moral systems. All of that is, you know, you can't just kind of delete that. But I can be aware of it. And so as I pursue objectivity, what I'm trying to do is be aware of what my biases are. You know, for example, if I don't know, if we're studying some kind of element of like criminal deviance, and I or my family have been a victim of that kind of crime, then maybe like studying that form of deviance and studying people who commit those forms of deviance is not something that's easy for me to do objectively, right? Because I feel in my gut the negative experience that I had with that in the past. I may not be able to eliminate that bias, but what I can do is be aware of it. I can be aware of it, and if I'm aware of it, then I can maybe minimize the way that I can maybe minimize the possibility that it might skew my analysis of the group. Okay. There is an overlap of crime and deviance, but it's not perfect. You know, most things that are criminalized are considered deviant, but not all. Like, for example, speeding, like a lot of like minor traffic violations are not deviant. You know, most people speed. If we're talking about going like 75 and a 70, that is illegal, right? That's technically illegal. That's against the law. But a lot of people do that, and so it is kind of normal. Even though it is illegal, it is normal, which means it is not deviant. So there is an overlap here. Some of the things we talk about in this class will have a relationship to crime, will be criminalized in the current time or in the past, and some will not. So there is an overlap there, but it's not a perfect overlap. So in this class, we're going to have 2 exams, a midterm and a final. I will be asking you, because I live in Waco and I'm not there to kind of proctor the exam. So because of that, I'm going to ask you to take the exam using an electronic device with a webcam. You'll have to use something called the lockdown browser, which makes it so that you can't like click out of the test to read some notes or whatever, and something called Respondus Monitor, which makes it so that there's like you have to use a device with a webcam that will record you to make sure you're not using notes off camera or just flipping through or whatever. So you're going to want to, and the syllabus has information about that. You're going to want to like install that onto your computer and make sure there's information about that there. There's a $15 fee to have like, I think it's either a 6-month or a 1-year subscription to the Respondus. If that $15 is like a deal breaker for you, let me know and I'll see if I can work something out. The exam, there's discussion boards and online journals. Most weeks there will be 2 discussion boards and 2 journals. And that stuff will all be due Friday night at midnight. It'll go live, each week's stuff will go live Monday morning, 6 a.m. and will be due Friday night at midnight. And there will be a paper on a documentary that I'm going to ask you to write. That information about that will come later. Our textbook is this book. It's called Constructions of Deviance by Patricia Adler and Peter Adler, and they're the editors of this book. It's a compilation of several different readings on deviant groups. So in this course, we're going to define deviance. What is it? What is it today? What was it in the past? And what are different definitions of deviance? We'll learn about different types of deviant behavior. We'll learn about the theories that are often used to explain deviance. If you took a crime and delinquency class, I teach that class at Harn Zimmerman, and I think there are others who taught it as well. We we talk about some of these theories that explain why crimes occur. And so we will look at some of those theories in this class too, as they frame deviance instead of crime. We'll look at reactions to deviance, and we'll think about the ways our own behavior might be considered abnormal or deviant. So things to be thinking about that we're going to be touching on: how should deviance be defined? How do we define whether this thing, this idea, this person could be classified as deviant? Is deviance something that is inherent in an act, or is deviance not really inherent in an act? Right? There's some perspectives on deviance would say deviance is not about the thing you're doing, it's about the way people react to it. So we'll be exploring that idea. Is deviance functional for society? In other words, does it serve a purpose for society? What do cultural boundaries tell us about ourselves and the groups we belong to? We all build up these boundaries, these kind of symbolic boundaries. And sometimes those boundaries are very sort of strong and hard to permeate, and sometimes they're not. And so the more deviant we would consider the group, the more likely they have like strong boundaries, so that not just anyone can be a part of it. How is deviance related to inclusion and exclusion? As we'll see, a lot of perspectives on deviance come from this idea that people in power are the ones who get to define what is deviant. And so deviance is kind of used as a means of excluding people and minimizing the power that they have access to. Why are people fascinated by deviance? How is deviance and punishment related to power? Okay. So a couple of things. So that's a kind of a general introduction to the course. And if you have questions about that, please email me, and I'll, I usually, try to do a good job of getting back within about 24 hours. Yeah. Okay. So let's just briefly kind of go into some of the things that are going to lay the groundwork for these next few weeks here. There are three perspectives on defining deviance that play a role. The first is what we call the absolutist perspective. According to the absolutist perspective, there is a widespread consensus about what is deviant and what is not. And the laws of any society reflect this consensus, and they're seen as given facts. There's something obvious about each deviant act that makes it different from conventional norms. So for our absolutist perspective, they look at deviance primarily as coming out of consensus. We have agreed that these are the things that are normal and these are the things that are abnormal, and our agreement about that is what determines what is deviant. With this absolutist perspective, deviance can be thought of as immoral or sinful or unnatural. And deviance is not determined by social customs, but it's intrinsic to the human condition, standing apart from and existing prior to these socially created codes. So the focus is often on the deviance itself. With the absolutist perspective can often accompany certain moral codes or religious codes that would say, like, here are the things that are right and here are the things that are wrong. And we understand that in some kind of black and white way. Right? That's what we say absolutist. That is one perspective of defining deviance. Another perspective is what we call a relativist perspective. According to the relativist perspective, groups in society make up rules to fit the practical needs of their situations. And so the rules are going to change because the situations change. And so the definitions of deviance are not universal. They vary to suit the people that hold them. This relativist perspective is the primary, is certainly a more dominant perspective in the field of sociology and among those who study deviance than the absolutist perspective is. One single act can hold multiple definitions, some deviance and some not. So it's some of these like hot button issues like abortion or LGBT rights or prayer in schools. Those things mean, different things in different contexts and to different people. In some cases, they're considered morally wrong. In some cases, they're not. In some cases, they're considered kind of abnormal, and in some cases, it's not. It all depends on the situation. And like a killing could be a good example, right? Killing could be considered justified or it could be unjustified. A person who kills in self-defense, or a person who kills in their role as a member of the military or as a law enforcement official, right? That's a very different thing than a person who kills because they got mad at somebody. And so both of those are killing, but we understand the circumstances of those to inform, the idea of whether that's considered normal or abnormal, right or wrong. So the relativist perspective says the state of deviance is caused by social circumstances. There's a focus on the norms bound and defined deviance. And so we might study things like how are norms created, who creates them, under what conditions are they created, what are the consequences of norms for different groups in society. And as I said before, this is an important perspective that we'll be dealing with here in this class. And the third is a social power perspective. This is, the relative perspective and the social power perspective are both common in the field of sociology. According to this perspective, views on crime and deviance are not arbitrarily formed by just any group of others. They're formed by people in power, the influence that powerful groups and classes have in creating and applying laws. The social power perspective says people in power get to make the rules, and they make the rules in a way that benefits them and that kind of subjugates or oppresses others, whoever those others are. So they might say the laws reflect the interests and the concerns of the dominant classes in society. The things that we punish are the things that are characteristic of people who have relatively less power. Some of our feminist theories are considered a part of this perspective, which we'll deal with a little bit later. Okay, we've got two readings this week. One is Erickson on the sociology of deviance. Let me kind of briefly go through some of what they say. This is going to be brief because obviously I want you to read it and understand the nuances of what they're saying. But just very briefly, Erickson's talking about the functions of deviance for society. And this is a classic idea, that do we think of deviance as being just like a negative thing that is problematic? Well, some of us do. Some sociologists would say deviance actually serves a function in society. In other words, societies need deviance to exist because deviance serves important functions in society. So for one, Erickson says, deviance leads us to continually redraw the social boundaries of acceptability and maintain those boundaries so that people know what is acceptable. We have the people breaking the rules, and that helps us define the rules themselves. Erickson says, boundaries remain a meaningful point of reference only so long as they are repeatedly tested by persons on the fringes of the group and repeatedly defended by persons chosen to represent the group's inner morality. So we need deviance. We need people kind of breaking the rules to help clarify what the rules are and to help clarify why those rules are in place and why they're believed in. The second function, he says, deviance and responses to it bolster cohesion, integration, and solidarity, making life more stable. So we feel a sense of kind of bonding with one another especially over punishment of deviance. And number three, the society creates deviance because it needs them in order to experience the boundary maintenance requirements and contribute to the survival of culture. Some of these theorists would say that we need there to be deviance because societies need to, here's another way of saying, societies need to establish this notion of like right and wrong and good and bad. And there is no such thing as the good guys unless there are bad guys, right? And so these theorists would say, we need to define ourselves as good guys. And we can only define ourselves as good guys if there are bad guys. So we need there to be bad guys to clarify the moral systems, to clarify the normative expectations, and to build kind of cohesion and group identity of us as the good guys, of us as the ones who are right thinking, okay? He says ceremonies that certify someone as deviant are almost irreversible. Once convicted, you're labeled a deviant, but there's no way to graduate from prison. Erickson writes, he is ushered, and he is like a person who's convicted of a crime. He is ushered into the deviant position by a decisive and often dramatic ceremony, like a trial. Yet is retired from it with scarcely a word of public notice. So it's easy to kind of become labeled as a deviant or as a criminal, but hard to become unlabeled as a deviant or a criminal. Okay, so that's the first article. The second, the integrated typology of deviance. This one is important because Heckert and Heckert bring these two different spectrums that we need to be aware of. The first is deviance can be looked at as an example of under-conformity or as over-conformity. So a person who does not conform enough to this norm is under-conformity, but a person who conforms too much to that norm is over-conformity. And then also this idea that some deviance is going to get a negative reaction and some is going to get a positive reaction. And so they talk about 4 different types. If you look at what they call negative deviance is an example. And then the negative deviance is what we usually think when we think about deviance. If I were to ask you to list a bunch of examples of deviance, a lot of what you're going to think of at first, your first instinct is going to be this negative deviance. It's someone who's not conforming enough to the laws, right? They're below that, and they get a negative reaction from most audiences, murder or adultery. But then you have people who are over conforming, and they also get a negative reaction. They call this rate busting. An example might be like nerds and geeks who are or just people who are seen as like too studious. This is obviously more of an issue in primary school, let's say, and like K through 12 school than it is in the rest of the world, or the rest of your life. But these are folks who are over conforming to, let's say, the need for success, and they're judged for that. And another example would be a blonde, like some of the stereotype of blondes being dumb. That is, most people think that's associated with blondes kind of over conforming to the kind of conventional notions of beauty, and that's going to lead to negative evaluations. Then you have those who receive positive evaluations. So those who are underconforming but are receiving positive reactions. He calls this deviance admiration. An example might be like a gangster who is thought of as cool, or like held up in society as some kind of icon of status, even though they are, the same sort of, technically the same criminals as the others. And then you've got what he calls positive deviance. They're over-conforming and they receive a positive evaluation. So someone like Mother Teresa, who's helping the poor, or someone who is heroic, who did something very unconventional, right? That could be an active deviance, like someone who, like, I don't know, stays behind to help people out of the burning building. That is not normal, right? And so because of that, you could think of that as a type of deviance, but it's going to receive a positive evaluation, right? And so that's what they would call positive deviance. And so they say deviance is relative and context is critical. For example, Martin Luther King was seen by most whites to be performing negative deviance in the 1960s, but today he's seen by most whites to be performing deviance admiration or positive deviance. So during the civil rights movement, in the year 2023, most people think of Martin Luther King as being, sort of unequivocally good, including white people think of Martin Luther King as being unequivocally good and doing good things. But when this is going on in the 1960s and the 1950s and 60s, most white people put Martin Luther King here. And this is a person this is negative deviance. And as time goes on and things change, norms change, beliefs change, he's probably going to be more here. Some would put him here, but mostly he would be put here. Our gifted students may be considered rate busters to some peers, like the quote unquote nerds or geeks, but teachers might consider them to be positive deviants. They both understand them to be over conforming to the norms of academic achievement, but for one audience it may have a negative reaction, and for another audience it might have a positive reaction. Okay, that's it. Let me stop my share. As I said, I'm going to be posting these, each week. You should get a brief introduction to what we're talking about, and I'll be on the discussion boards, paying attention there, and I'll chiming in when I think it's appropriate. As I said before, if you need anything, email me. Also, my cell phone number is on the syllabus, so you can text me as well. That if you need to get in touch with me quickly, text is probably more of a quick option than email. Okay, have a good day.